to Newsline on Channel 31. My name is Melissa Arul.
And I'm Athos Sirianos. It's 4 o'clock in Melbourne.
Over the next hour, we're going to look at news and current affairs from across Australia and the world. And we'll be joined in the studio by a business expert who will talk about how university graduates can best prepare themselves to enter the workplace.
But first, let's look at the news to the minute. A man has stabbed 15 people at a Kawasaki bus stop this morning. 2 adults and 1 child are believed to have died, with as many as 8 children and 7 adults injured. We'll have more on this in international news with Lisa Favazzo. Commuters on the Sunbury line are the big winners from the $27.4 billion allocated to reshape the suburban transport system. Station platforms will be widened and the line's capacity will be increased to fit an extra 113,000 weekly passengers. The investment also includes $6.6 billion to remove 25 level crossings. Authorities are investigating another post-match brawl between AFL supporters. A group of men in Richmond gear were involved in an altercation at a car park on Olympic Boulevard following the Dreamtime at the G match. This comes after 3 other incidents involving fan violence at the MCG this season. At least 42 prisoners were found dead across 4 Brazilian prisons in the state of Amazonas. The Amazonas State Prison says the deaths were a result of clashes between rival gangs, and prisoners were found hanging in their cells. They were believed to be strangled to death.
And now to the news in politics with Sarah Kessler. Sarah, you begin with national affairs.
Thanks, Mel. New Labor leader Anthony Albanese says he is prepared to work alongside Prime Minister Scott Morrison to end what he terms conflict fatigue. Mr Albanese has offered to work with the Prime Minister on key policy issues, including climate and Indigenous recognition. Mr Albanese is now in Queensland on his first trip as Labor leader. The trip comes after Labor saw a drop in support from the state, with Mr Albanese saying he is there to talk to the people of Queensland and listen to their issues. Back in Canberra, the Coalition has begun talks with Senate crossbenchers as they decide whether or not to support the government's $158 billion tax cut package. Turning to European politics now, and some are predicting Nigel Farage could be Britain's next Prime Minister if the EU election results are repeated at a national level. Mr Farage's Brexit party beat the ruling Conservatives and the main opposition decisively in the just completed European poll. We will have more on the EU elections later on. US President Donald Trump says he is not bothered by North Korea's recent missile tests in the region. In a joint press conference with Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe in Tokyo, Mr Trump argued the missile test didn't violate UN Security Council resolutions. North Korea launched short-range ballistic missiles earlier this month, ending a suspension of tests that began in late 2017. And that's it for News in Politics. Back to you.
Thanks, Sarah. And don't forget that a little later in the show, we'll be getting some good advice on how university graduates can best equip themselves for getting a job. Mel, it's something that as university students we do not want to miss. We want to know how to enter the workforce and make sure we're ready to go.
I think it's going to be a really interesting topic and hot topic of discussion, so stay tuned for that later. And now it's time to look at news across Australia with Lily Graydon.
Thanks, guys. South Australia are referring the state's mental department to the Human Rights Commission. And discriminatory.
Well, that's an interesting development there. We'll have more on that very shortly.
Sure.
The Doctors Union has written to the Australian Commission, as we've just heard, and they're asking for an investigation. So there's plenty going on there. We'll bring that to you very, very shortly. The Health Department has also come on record saying a range of different things, and it's an interesting investigation to say the least.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And the 28-year-old nurse was fatally stabbed while helping others during the event 2 years ago that happened in the London attack. 8 people died, and the attack in an inquest is still underway. An attack has left Melbourne community of Melbourne shaken as they process the recent violence towards women. Courtney Heron, 25, was found dead in Royal Park on Saturday morning. Henry Hammond, 27, was arrested and interviewed on Sunday. Homicide squad and detectives charged him with one account of murder overnight. Fire safety urge after a man lit a barbecue with a gas bottle flamethrower. In a shocking turn of events, the attempt to flamethrower the barbecue went badly on the Geelong man, sustained minor burns to a large part of the body. After the video of the stunt was posted on social media, copycats act began surfacing around Australia, with a Sydney man suffering serious burns after throwing a whole bucket of fire starters onto open flames. It's lit, he screamed as he was literally on fire.
Yeah, he wasn't lit in the way that we know it, but he was literally lit. And the Fire and Safety Supervisor, John Farrer, put a notice out to remind people the power of common sense. As they say, the thing about common sense is not very common. And that's a look at the news happening in Australia. But we'll now cross over to the Banyule City Council, where it has moved to improve the way it deals with gambling addiction. The Victorian Responsible Gambling Foundation says the changes are in line with current best practice. April Austin reports.
The terms problem gambler and problem gambling will now be replaced by terms such as gambling harm and people harmed by gambling.
So the thing about problem gambling is that it's now very much a stigmatising term. It tends to be seen in tandem with responsible gambling, and both of those work around an idea that when people have problems from their gambling or harm from their gambling, it's actually their fault.
On top of reducing stigma, the language changes recognise the extent of harm from gambling.
When we talk about harm from gambling, we know that 85% of the harm from gambling doesn't come from that small group of problem gamblers. It also comes from other people who gamble and gamble in ways maybe not so often or not so frequently.
Gambling is a big issue in the Banyule area specifically, which has led to the changes.
Banyule is not one of the worst in the state, but if you look at the amount, $54 million is lost in Banyule through gambling. The money being lost is by the most vulnerable within our community and the people who can least afford it. Every person that is being harmed by gambling, it is impacting 8 other people as well within their family and their friends.
Councillor Malikan says it is ridiculous that gaming venues are allowed to stay open 20 hours a day.
That's when the real harm is being done, when people are sitting there in the middle of the night, there's not many people around, they're bored, they're lonely, and they just gamble. The hours of operation are far less at the RSLs, whereas the private venues are open much longer. If you look at the loss per machines, it's much higher at the private venues.
Opening hours of venues is a state issue, so there's little councils can do. But Banyule City Council is doing what they can to change the discussion around gambling harm. April Austin in Banyule for RMIT Newsline.
We are taking a quick break. We'll be back with you shortly with more headlines.
Welcome back to Newsline on Channel 31. It's 12 minutes past 4. I'm Athos Sirianos.
And I'm Melissa Arul. The Victorian government in yesterday's budget announced several rail projects aimed to make the lives of Melburnians commuters easier. Carly Waters has been looking at the effects of the new announcement and joins us live from one of the metro construction sites. Carly, what are some of the rail projects we can expect to see over the next few years? What can you tell us about the Sunbury line upgrade, Carly?
Well, it is a massive project that the Andrews government is undertaking. They're spending it.
We've lost Carly there. We'll do our best to get them back. We'll head over now to international news. There's a bit going on there. There's been some issues over in Greece. As always, there's a few issues over in Italy with problems in the EU. And we're going to cross to Lisa Favazzo with the international news. Lisa, what's happening in Europe?
Guys, the results are in for the European parliamentary elections and they give insight into the divided political mood across the continent. As touched on earlier, the Nigel Farage-led Brexit Party has crushed the competition, finishing with around 30% of the vote. He may have milkshake on his blazer, but it's the major parties left with egg on their face, securing less than 30% of the vote between them. Italy, France, Hungary and Greece and Poland have all seen considerable swings towards the right. Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the far-right party in Italy, Matteo Salvini, says the results will force change in the EU elections. In Greece, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras has called a sudden general election after his far-left Syriza party only won 24% of the EU vote. The opposing centre-right party, New Democracy, got a 10% lead over his party. However, left-aligned parties have also performed very well. In fact, the Greens have never performed so well in EU history. They achieved second in Germany and Finland and third in France. Liberal and Socialist parties also strengthened their governing hands in Denmark, Spain and Portugal. Newly elected German Greens member, Sergej Lewinsky, has attributed the left swing to a newly politicised and climate-concerned younger generation. We have some more detail on the breaking story about the stabbing in Japan. A stabbing has left over a dozen people injured in Tokyo today. 3 people are thought to be dead, 2 of which are children of school age. 2 knives were found by police after they were called to the scene at around 8 a.m. local time. A middle-aged male suspect has been detained but is currently unconscious as he stabbed himself in the shoulder. Details are still coming through. Melissa Arul will have more on this around 4:30 p.m. And that's all from me, but back to you guys.
Thank you. Well, we seem to have Carly back with us. What are some of the metro rail projects that are coming up for Melbourne this year?
Doesn't seem like we have Carly just yet, but some interesting developments there as well as overseas. Greece is calling for a general election. Alexis Tsipras. There's never a dull moment over in Greece. There's always so much going on there, but we'll head over to some more local news. And Australia has been one of the slowest developed nations to adopt electric vehicles. And how can Australians be driven to buy one? Well, Stephen Ganavas looks at what the government can do.
There are over 19 million motor vehicles registered in Australia. Electric vehicles make up just a tiny fraction of that. In 2017, just 7 vehicles per 10,000 sold were electric. This lags behind other developed nations such as Norway, who sell more electric vehicles than traditional ones.
In Australia, part of the problem here is that you're not just buying a new car, you're buying a whole automotive system, which means that we have to, if someone purchasing an electric vehicle in Australia has to consider who's going to service this, what the secondary markets look like, what will insurance look like.
Early adopters are not entirely convinced by these perceived barriers to entry in the market, despite the higher price point.
At the moment the vehicles are relatively expensive. That is to say they're no more expensive than a high-end four-wheel drive twin cab ute, but that's perceived as being expensive, and also lack of knowledge around how efficient they are and how good and suitable they are for everyday use.
The shift to electric vehicles will mean consumers will need to change their habits. Charging stations are a primary concern, but consumers will also need to be aware of changes to insurance, servicing and the secondary market for their vehicles.
And there's a lot of uncertainties around those other aspects of the automotive supply chain, of the sort of whole-of-life aspects of the vehicle.
One of the major concerns is range. An infrastructure network of charging stations is starting to emerge around the country, but availability is still a concern. Some argue that this concern is unwarranted.
For everyday use, most owners of an EV will use them for commuting or for their general jobs around the metropolitan area. Now, 99% of these trips are under 100 kilometres, which is well within the range of current electric vehicles or even electric vehicles from 5 years ago.
Stephen Ganavas in Melbourne for Newsline.
Well, Australia's biggest beer festival has come and gone. Organisers were expecting over 75,000 from all over Australia. As I found out, people were able to try a range of locally crafted beers. If there's one drink which can unite people from all over the world, it's beer. This is what the people at Good Beer Week seek to do every year through their event. From humble beginnings, the festival has grown to become the biggest beer event in Australia, attracting beer lovers from all over the world.
So that happened in 2011 for the first time. Now 9 years on, we've got over 300 events. It's citywide, it's out in regional areas. It's it's pretty nuts how much it's blown up since then.
Since its launch in 2011, Good Beer Week has grown nearly 500%. Now, in its 9th year, the festival contains many activities, with its theme all about enjoying beer and the good times.
This year I think there's been a real focus on good times. The theme for the year is Good Times Roll, or Let the Good Times Roll. And we've got wrestling on tonight, for example. There's a car park handball competition. There's dodgeball happening. We're going beyond beer and food, and we're sort of bringing beer into just normal day activities.
Not only does Good Beer Week attract beer lovers from all over Australia, but allows for new and local brewers to come down and show off their greatest creations. Local brewers like Neil Mills, founder of Burnley Brewing, comes to Good Beer Week for the first time as a brewer after starting in the industry just 18 months ago.
Oh, really good fun. I remember coming to this event as a punter before we kicked off our brewery project, and good fun working with Old Wives Ales. Really nice just to have a chat to all locals. People are so keen to try the beers and get amongst it. It's just a pleasure to be a part of.
For many punters and brewers, this festival is lager than life. Athos Sirianos reporting for Newsline.
Wow, Athos, that was a very interesting experience for you. Could you tell us about the highlight during that event?
It was a great event. I unfortunately, because I'm still on my green peas, wasn't able to drink, but my cameraman had a few. That's probably why the footage was a bit shaky, but a great experience for all involved. Many local brewers were there. They had plenty of great conversations with many punters, many experienced beer drinkers. It was great for everyone, really. I spoke to many locally crafted brewers. One of the brewers had only been in the industry for 18 months, so he was very excited to get lots of feedback on his beers. And as I mentioned there late in the piece, the experience was lager than life. A fantastic pun that I used there.
Wow. I'm glad you had a great time.
I had a great time. I was even lucky enough to take a few beers home. They're still sitting in my fridge. I might crack a few open after this broadcast is finished.
Wow. And we are going to take a quick break, but we'll be back with you shortly.
Welcome back to Newsline on Channel 31. It's 22 minutes past 4 and we still have a fantastic live interview to get to with Carissa Shale. If you're a university student, you will not want to miss that. Plenty to discuss about what employers expect out in the workplace.
We are finally back with Carly Waters, and she has been looking at the effects of the new announcement and joins us live from the Metro construction sites. Carly, what are some of the rail projects we can expect to see over the next few years?
As so many expected, it was a very rail infrastructure heavy budget that was released yesterday. A couple of really key policies to come out of it in terms of rail infrastructure is an upgrade to the assembly line, the potential for Melbourne to finally get its airport rail in, and the removal of even more parking.
Carly, great to have you on. What can you tell us about the Sunbury upgrade?
So the government is spending a massive $2 billion on this Sunbury line. So kind of this upgrade will be every single train station on the Sunbury line is getting an upgrade, and it will also involve funding new high-capacity trains to really accommodate for just how huge the population is getting in Melbourne's west. It's estimated that an extra 113,000 passengers will be able to travel on these trains during high peak.
And we're going to, that's a fantastic development in the Metro train. It's something that's been planned and spoken about for so long. It's just outside our studio here. We hear the noise constantly. It keeps us awake in those tired times when the coffee can't. But Melissa, I believe we are now going to go over the latest headlines.
Yes, we have more headlines for you. In Sydney, the state government will make an announcement later today that level 1 water restrictions will be enforced. An Australian is being awarded one of the highest honours in the nursing profession for her bravery and sacrifice during the London Bridge terror attack last year. South Australian Kirsty Bowden was brutally stabbed while helping victims at the scene. She later died. The Galilee Basin in central Queensland has one of the largest undeveloped coal reserves in the world. The Queensland government has just met with one of Clive Palmer's companies, Warth Coal, to discuss plans for coal-fired power stations in the Galilee Basin. US President Donald Trump will be given the royal treatment next week, where he will be traveling to the United Kingdom for a 3-day visit.
Very exciting there for Donald Trump. He loves travelling around the world, doesn't he?
He does.
He can hop on his private jet of his and be anywhere within a few hours. We're going to now go to a very interesting story where an increasing number of underage girls are seeking injectable enhancements. Australians spend an estimated $1 billion a year on cosmetic procedures, with lip fillers the most popular. Caitlin Galafatis reports.
The demand for plumped up lips are in.
We do see a trend. We get more inquiry, more phone calls and emails regarding cosmetic injectables, so it is becoming more of a trend.
Instead of searching for the best makeup artist and hairdresser in town, young girls are looking for the top-rated plastic surgeons. Why have lip fillers become a young girl's staple in her beauty routine? Well, for a generation glued to their phones, a plump pair of lips are in the top of young girls' wish lists, as well as their Instagram feeds.
I do believe social media has had a big impact on the way women see themselves, and unfortunately we see it all the time that it has affected their confidence and perhaps made them look at themselves in what I would say is perhaps a little bit of a distorted view of how they see themselves aesthetically.
And with the demand for underage procedures on the rise, what does the future of the average client look like?
So anybody under the age of 18 we don't treat at the clinic whatsoever, regardless of whether there's a parent consenting or wishing to consent. Anybody under the age of 18 isn't treated at our clinic.
Beauty mogul Kylie Jenner was ready to come clean in 2015 when she admitted to get lip fillers at just the young age of 15. Influencers like Kylie Jenner can be credited for her impact on today's beauty culture. However, underage plastic surgery may be the most disturbing trend to date.
I think that you should be able to do what you want with your body. I really like them.
I know girls can be really self-conscious of their looks these days, so I don't think it's that invasive. I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Others weren't so convinced.
No, I don't agree. I think once they reach 18, then they can do it.
No matter how normalised the procedure has become, there is still a stigma around the issue. Although the subject of underage fillers certainly remains taboo, don't be surprised if this becomes the staple of every young girl's beauty routine. Caitlin Galafatis in Shepparton for Newsline.
Welcome back to Newsline. I'm Carissa Shale. Recent figures released by the Graduate Outcomes Survey revealed that almost 3/4 of 2018 university graduates gained employment 4 months after leaving university. The study showed that students in the fields of pharmacy and medicine had the highest rate of graduate employment, with students in the creative arts, tourism and hospitality with the lowest rates of employment. The study also revealed that only 57% of graduates felt their university degree adequately prepared them for the workforce. Today, we have business coach and analyst Nancy Huang in the studio to give us some insight into transitioning from university to the workforce. So Nancy, we're now halfway through the year and a lot of university students are already starting to prepare themselves for full-time work. What advice would you give to a student?
I would suggest that they actually prepare their resumes really well. Look back at what they've done in the last 3 or 4 years at their university degree and really pick out the salient points in terms of what really will sell them in the marketplace. And also I'd really encourage people to actually try to get some part-time jobs, volunteer if necessary, or do some internships, or even just be able to shadow people in a workplace situation so that they can actually get a sense of how workplaces really run and how they would actually enjoy the field that they've actually chosen to be in.
You mentioned internships. What about international study or international experience?
Yes, absolutely. All those things are really, really great, not only just in terms of your resume, but also in terms of giving you that live experience that that a lot of young people really, really need to set themselves apart in this competitive workplace.
You have particular expertise in the world of business and banking. So what are employees in the business field looking in particular from a graduate?
Sure. In the business area, it's really, what we're really starting to find is that it's really a convergence of, say, technology, business, even things like journalism, communications, marketing, and lots of different areas all converging in terms of meeting our business needs. What we're finding is that it's not really just the technical skills that we're really after. In fact, far more important, what we're really looking for are really the soft skills, the ability for people to be able to collaborate, work in teams, but also be able to think independently, to be able to actually take the initiative, take that responsibility and accountability, to show that they are actually able to think and be creative problem solvers. So those are some of the qualities that we're really looking for in young graduates today.
So moving on to some interview skills.
Yep.
I imagine you've done quite a few job interviews in your life, as well as had to be on the other end of that as well.
Yes.
So what are the most important things that you should consider when going into a job interview?
I think prepare, prepare and prepare. Really, I mean, obviously dress the part, dress for the job that you actually want, and also really prepare for the questions that your interviewer might ask of you. So once again, it's not just about the technical skills, it's really about in that short half-hour to hour interview session, you need to be able to showcase your talent, but also be able to actually show people who you really are, what you stand for, and what you will actually bring to the table to the employer.
So what do you think the most important things for any university student to do right now before they leave university? Do you think it's important to be speaking to their lecturers and their professors and really asking a lot of questions?
I think, well, obviously, in your final year, you've already done most of your degree, so it's really about getting a sense as to whether you would like the area or the field of study that you've actually pursued as it translates to the workplace. So it's really, really important. But I want to also encourage people to actually seek out experiences, to really try different things. So your first job is never going to be your lifelong job, rarely going to be your lifelong job. So really, in the first few years of your work life, it's really about experience. Think that as the first and foremost of the asset that you will actually try to gain in the first few years of your working life.
You've already touched on it, but you just mentioned that people have lots of different careers and different jobs in their lifetime. How do you think we can prepare for that kind of flexibility in our life and our career?
Okay, yeah, great question actually. So what we're finding is that adaptability or agility is really, really coming to the fore in terms of what employers are actually seeking. That's really the ability to be able to be flexible about what you're working. So in a journalism degree, for example, you can't restrict yourself to say, I just want to work in print media. I need to be flexible in terms of saying, okay, well, maybe I can work in public relations because that's about communication, it's about writing. Maybe I could actually stretch a little bit further and try something like marketing. So in the world of business, it's exactly the same thing. So we don't actually just look at finance or accounting or just playing with numbers. We're actually looking at a divergence of different aspects of the world. And that's why diversity and agility are very, very important in the new world of work.
In your time in the business field, obviously, there's been a lot of adaptations in technology, but what do you think has been the biggest shift in the business world?
The biggest, I think technology definitely first and foremost. I work in banking, and the digitization of anything that we do is just so prevalent now. I mean, if you look at, you're probably banking on your mobile phone. I would imagine you'll probably have a mobile bank app. I mean, if you look back, say 20 years ago, ATMs weren't even probably around, and we've started with the ATMs to essentially to provide a technology avenue for you to be able to withdraw cash and deposit cash. And now we're actually getting so far away from the physical nature of cash, that we're actually, using credit cards, and it's not just about the physical credit cards. We now have Apple Pay, Google Pay, and lots of different technology disruptions in the banking sector. And this is not alone. You can see newspapers, photography, and lots of different industries being disrupted by technology. And that is definitely one of the key aspects that young graduates really need to get a handle on.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I don't think most of us don't really carry much cash anymore. But do you think this is dangerous?
Cash?
Not carrying
not
cash,
carrying
not
cash.
having that idea of hard currency.
Yeah. I think not carrying cash per se is probably not a dangerous thing. I think what we have to be very conscious of is security, about and privacy and security. So obviously things like PINs, you have to make sure that no one knows what it is. Have to make sure it's not just 1, 2, 3, 4. In fact, most of the banking apps would actually disallow you from actually punching in 1, 2, 3, 4 as your PIN. So be really conscious that maybe on the occasion change those PIN numbers so that other people don't actually come around to guess what they are, and just be really secure about how you actually use your digital apps and how you actually access your digital money.
Fascinating. I will just move a little bit back into the waters of business and graduating. Just in terms of networking, what advice would you give and how to network?
Sure. Look, I think what's really, really important is that you've obviously, a lot of the graduates today come from a cohort of other fellow graduates. So it's really important to keep up those connections, because they're essentially your peers who will be most likely be traveling in similar fields. And also, alumni and associations like that are really, really important. If you happen to end up in a sort of largest corporation, there will be other sort of similar age peers, or in fact people, it doesn't even have to be people from a similar age. There will be lots of different social clubs and different aspects like that where you can actually start the network. In places like banking, we actually have lots of different mentorships and informal guidance, if you like, where we can actually help people to actually broaden their horizon and also move in their career path.
Great, thank you so much for joining us in the studio today, Nancy. And your insight is really valuable for all of us.
No worries. Thank you.
We'll be taking a quick break and we'll be back very shortly.
Thank you.
Welcome back. I am Melissa Arul.
And I'm Athos Sirianos on Newsline on Channel 31. If you've missed any of the show so far, head over to Channel 31's website or the City Journal, where you can see the full Newsline program in full.
Coming up next, RMIT students are getting disgruntled by an increased emergency evacuations. Lisa Favasso investigates how the community is responding to this.
At RMIT's City campus have tripled over the last 5 years, according to Google Trend data. These students have just had their studies disrupted by a mystery emergency.
Well, I was studying for for one of my classes, and so I was really getting into it, and then I got the evacuation thing, and I'm like, God.
I left all my stuff behind in the library, so now I actually need to go back to pick it up.
Basically, I have a mid-sem that's worth 40% coming up later today, and I'm screwed.
David Stanley is a university staff member who takes on the voluntary role of fire warden during evacuations. He's urging people to take them seriously.
I'm quite surprised how people don't react and how much prodding people really need. I think that, if they really valued their life, then perhaps they should react, but they don't react as much as I think they should.
Students often joke about the frequency of the evacuations online, one even joking that the university offers a complimentary master's in evacuation.
Students will take it less seriously each time, and then when an actual emergency happens, procedures won't exactly go through smoothly.
It's for people's safety, so I don't think people should joke about it so much. Like, most of the time it's a false alarm, but you never know if it's a false alarm or if it's a real thing.
It's RMIT's Security Department's policy not to speak with media, but according to Executive Director of Property, Chris Hewson, evacuations are inevitable due to the university's size and location.
If you are evacuated, it might not be because there's a fire in your area, but because there's so many different areas where there are sensors and so many different areas where a fire could start.
Lisa Favazzo, RMIT Melbourne, Newsline.
An important message from the RMIT fire wardens: take the evacuation seriously no matter how many there are a week.
Let's hope there won't be anyone that evacuation today
No,
on live.
fingers crossed.
Let's hope not. Well, we have Carly Waters back in the studio with us, and we'll be discussing Victorian infrastructure. Road infrastructure was another key pillar of yesterday's state budget. Now we are with Carly here in the studio, and the roads have been a continuous issue, but it looks like the North East Link is getting all the money it needs to go ahead.
Yes, that's right. Treasurer Tim Pallas yesterday announced that the North East Link would be fully funded by the state to the tune of $15.8 billion. It is a huge sum of money, but the government expects the project to really significantly ease traffic congestion, and some of the key aims obviously being to reduce trucks on suburban streets and to complete the Western Ring Road, ultimately connecting it to the Eastern Freeway, which would also receive an upgrade. And it would ultimately allow more drivers to bypass the CBD altogether, which is really great.
So great to see a bit of time being saved there, because as we know, travelling on the freeways, any freeway, the M1, 2 or 3, can be quite tedious, especially if the radio is only playing commercials. But Carly, how are Victorians going to benefit with these new plans?
So they're just going to benefit immensely. So the congestion element and removing that is very clear. But cyclists also stand to benefit from this project because proposed walkways will be built along with the road itself. And there are very significant benefits to the Victorian economy. The government predicts that this project will create 10,000 jobs. Now, with 1 in 10 Victorians employed in the construction industry, the construction sector really is a key pillar of the Victorian economy.
So the northeast is a goer, of course, but the east-west tunnel is still not getting any love from the state government. Why is this the case?
Well, despite a $4 billion pledge from the federal government, Daniel Andrews has really stood firm about his refusal not to support this project. He just continues to insist that it's of no benefit to the Victorian taxpayer. Opposition leader Michael O'Brien has criticised Daniel Andrews for knocking back so much money for this road, but the Premier is really digging his heels in on this issue.
Thanks, Carly. And now over to Claire Maher with our finance news.
Thanks very much, guys. So the big finance news today is, of course, the handing down of the Victorian budget last night. Overall, we've seen a surplus of $1 billion this year, with growing surpluses estimated over the next 4 years. But net debt is also set to increase from $39 billion this financial year to $54.9 billion in 2022-23. In broader markets, the ASX 200 and the All Ords started the day dropping slightly, but we've recovered a little bit. The S&P closed 0.75% down, while the Nikkei opened 0.37% higher. European markets finished strongly last night after European election results showed pro-EU parliaments kept a strong hold over Parliament despite the surge in populist and minor parties. The euro is slightly higher as a result, with $1 Australian buying 61 euro cents. The Australian dollar is currently trading at 69 US cents, 54 UK pence and 75 Japanese yen. Bitcoin also had a good day, posting a 10% rise to reach a 2019 high. And in commodities, oil, gold, copper and silver saw slight rises, while natural gas fell slightly as well. That's your finance news for today, guys.
Thank you very much for that, Claire. Great to see that the EU is going strong, the euro dollar, because June, July, the busiest time to travel to Europe. And if the dollar is, or the euro is strong, it means that there's a good reward for Australians going over.
I think so. It'll be a really good vacay, June, July.
Where would your ideal European destination be?
Well, if you ask me, probably be somewhere in Portugal.
Okay.
Well, maybe, because I'm being biased. See, I'm from Portugal, so I definitely pick Portugal. I don't know about you.
Well, I wouldn't mind a €2 soup and beer on the beach there in Greece. We're going to take another quick break, but plenty more still to come after this.
More Newsline in this evening today, and now it's time for sport with Connor Morrissey.
Well, on field they've sunk to 1-9, but Carlton's biggest problems are off field. They're investigating Dale Thomas after he told the club he'd been drinking on Friday night, 2 days before the Blues lost to St Kilda. Thomas was at an event for cancer charity Camp Quality, where he told the club he had 2 drinks days after being fined $7,500 for calling umpire Michael Barlow a cheat. The Blues investigation will include former ruckman Robert Warnock, who was present at the function. The AFL's newly introduced mid-season draft took place last night. Carlton used the first selection on West Australian midfielder Josh DeLuca, but Marlian Pickett was the story of the night. The 27-year-old was chosen by Richmond despite speculation that he might miss out after suffering a broken finger on the eve of the draft. Just days before the Cricket World Cup, Australia's top order is still in doubt after Usman Khawaja top-scored with 89 runs against Sri Lanka in the Aussies' final warm-up game. Returning star David Warner was widely tipped to secure a position opening the batting alongside captain Aaron Finch, but Khawaja's 89 puts him squarely in contention for the role, as Australia comfortably chased down Sri Lanka's target of 240. Australia's World Cup defence begins against Afghanistan on Saturday. And so far, so good for the Aussies at the French Open. Women's 8th seed Ash Barty defeated American Jessica Pegula 6-3, 6-3, setting up a second-round match with Danielle Collins. Sam Stosur is also through to the second round, while in the men's draw, young guns Alex de Minaur and Alexei Papiron both had impressive victories. John Millman has a tough challenge tonight against 5th seed Alexander Zverev, while Bernard Tomic, Matt Ebden and Jordan Thompson are also scheduled to play. Although Test captain Tim Payne won't appear in the Cricket World Cup, he might just receive a late call-up to the Boomers basketball squad. Attending a match for the Southern Huskies in Hobart, Payne nailed this shot from half-court. And Aston Villa's 2-1 victory over Derby County in the EFL final will see them back into the English Premier League after 3 years on the outer. No doubt many Australian fans will be happy to see Mile Jedinak back in the top tier. Athos, how do you think Aston Villa will go next season?
Connor, I think they'll actually go quite well. They're a traditional Premier League club, a powerhouse. It was unfortunate that they were relegated. They've got a wealth of experience. Interesting to see where the midfielder Jack Grealish sticks around, because many Premier League sides will be looking to sign him up in the transfer window. As for Derby County, they could be without their manager Frank Lampard, who has been linked to Chelsea after Maurizio Sarri looks as though he'll take the Juventus job. So a big season ahead for the Villains.
And of course, Richmond now picking up Marlian Pickett despite an 8-week injury, which he only sustained days before the draft. What do you think of that? Would you have preferred them to take a healthy player?
Now, from all reports, Marlian is a great recruit. As we know, Sean Grigg did recently retire, which is unfortunate because he was a premiership ruckman, and it means that that 2017 premiership team will no longer play together. A great move by him for the team's sake to retire. But I'm very excited by Marlian. We've heard some great things about him, and he should slot into the squad nicely if he's called upon.
And how does he go in the ruck compared to Grigg?
Not quite sure. I haven't seen too many of his ruck highlights, but the Tigers have got a few problems in the ruck of their own, with Nankervis is injured, and Ivan Solder will be back this week from that ridiculous suspension, if you ask me. He shouldn't have gone. But it will be good to see him back in the squad. They face a North Melbourne side with plenty to prove after Brad Scott's mutual termination from the club. He did step down, of course, gave David King a nice bump along the way. How do you see North Melbourne faring without Brad Scott and with former Swans player Rhys Shaw in charge?
It's always difficult to tell. I think after a coach departs, I think sometimes it sort of galvanises the group and they can just get back to concentrating on footy after there's all the headlines swirling around the coach. But will it be interesting to see if this can sort of help refocus the North Melbourne players.
Thanks, Connor. And now for weather with Caitlin Kalafatis.
We begin today with a severe weather warning. You can expect damaging winds if you're part of the central Gippsland district and surrounding suburbs. Winds will be averaging 60 to 70 kilometres an hour with peak gusts of up to 100 kilometres. It is expected winds will develop along parts of the coast and alpine areas during Tuesday afternoon and evening. Wind gusts may reach 110 kilometres an hour over the alpine area Tuesday night. Damaging winds are also likely to continue on Wednesday and may extend to remaining southern and mountainous areas. For the rest of your Tuesday afternoon, it will be mostly cloudy. The current temperature is 15 degrees and we will be reaching a max of 16, but it will be dropping down to 10 tonight. There is an 80% chance of rain, so expect showers during the afternoon and evening. Winds are currently northwesterly and will reach up to 40 kilometres an hour with strong gusts of winds. Wednesday is also looking partly cloudy, with a minimum of 8 degrees reaching a top of 12. There's a very high chance of rain, thunderstorms and possible hail from the late tomorrow morning. Winds are westerly up to 40 kilometres an hour. We will be kicking off the weekend with cloudy morning and a shower or two on Saturday afternoon. With a minimum of 12 degrees and a max of 16, there is a medium chance of rain. Finally, Sunday will bring a little more rain to end our week with a few showers, light winds later in the day and a maximum of 16 degrees. And that's your weather to the minute. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Caitlin. I tell you what, those Starks were onto something. Winter has well and truly come. Of course, no spoilers for Game of Thrones, please. I'm only up to season 4. But interestingly, the fashion industry is creating environmental concerns as the emissions caused by dumped clothing become the second largest global polluter. Discarded and unwanted fabrics and textiles contribute more than 1 billion tonnes of carbon toward greenhouse gas emissions every year. Jessica Boland has more.
It's called fast fashion, and Australians are one of the biggest global contributors, dumping over 500,000 tonnes of clothing into our landfills every year. These synthetic textiles are frequently non-biodegradable and can take up to 1,000 years to decompose into microplastics, which remain in our environment and pollute our waters.
Well, the need for sustainable fabrics is more important now than ever. When you're throwing out synthetics into our environment, it's creating incredible damage. But if you create your own garments from organic materials locally sourced, then you're doing your part to help the environment.
Fast fashion is a major environmental problem, and awareness is one of the biggest issues. Many people aren't aware of the detrimental impacts their shopping is having.
The charity sector is currently processing a super high volume of textiles that are not actually resellable. So the charity sector has become kind of waste managers to a certain extent.
What do you do with your old clothes you don't wear anymore?
I usually just throw them out.
I usually op shop.
Oof, chuck them out.
How do you feel hearing that thrown out clothes contribute to 1.2 billion tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions every year?
I wouldn't say I feel good about it, definitely not.
Yeah, it's crazy to think how much we waste. It's pretty ridiculous.
It's pretty disappointing. There has to be a way, I think, to make that a little bit better, definitely.
Everyone, up and down the chain is very concerned about this. China no longer agreed to buy waste from Australia, the UK, and the USA. And it meant that you suddenly had a lot of excess waste and nothing really to do with it. Take advantage of the education that's on offer. Learn a little bit more about what happens when you put your textiles in the bin.
While a small number of big brands are introducing more environmentally friendly materials into their stores, more needs to be done to make Australia's destructive desire for trend sustainable. Jessica Boland, Newsline.
And now for the latest art news with April Austin.
Thanks, guys. A South Australia-based German stonemason has volunteered to help rebuild the Notre Dame Cathedral free of charge. Christian Frenzel is a trained cathedral stonemason with experience restoring churches around the world. Mr. Frenzel is not the only Australian interested in the Notre Dame restoration, however, with Adelaide architectural firm Arcuate also putting their hand up to help. The French government is yet to decide on the rebuild plans. 3 artworks by British landscape artist John Constable that have been held in private collections for years are set to be auctioned next month. An oil painting of Constable's uncle is expected to sell for up to £50,000, which is over 90,000 Australian dollars. A pencil drawing of Constable's wife, whose premature death was devastating for the artist, is expected to sell for up to £12,000 or 22,000 Australian dollars. Because the portraits had personal significance to Constable,
They stand out for being different to his usual landscapes. In music news, Michael Bublé has announced he will be touring Australia in February next year. Bublé will be taking his show An Evening with Michael Bublé to Brisbane, Sydney, Adelaide, Melbourne and Perth. It's been 6 years since the Canadian singer has travelled down under, and he won't be coming alone. A 36-piece orchestra will be joining him on the road. And the first ever Melbourne International Youth Film Festival will be held this weekend. The two-day festival will feature 25 of the best short films from around the world, made by people all under the age of 25. 16 countries will be represented in the festival, including 6 films created by Australian filmmakers. That could be your weekend plans sorted. Back to you in the studio.
Thank you, April. Looking forward to that Michael Bublé concert. He sings many good Dean Martin songs, but that's all we've got time for here on Newsline. Of course, if you'd missed any of it, head over to the Channel 31 website or the City Journal. But from us, it's goodbye for now.